So imagine that you're going out to a barbecue with your family, everyone you love's around, so you guys are grilling burgers and stuff. So it's a great time, you go home, the next day, you don't feel very good, so you're like, alright, I'll just get through the day, go to work and whatnot. You decide, okay, I'm going to go home. You're not feeling very well at home, and then the next day you wake up and you have blood in your bowels, and you're like, okay, something's clearly wrong here. So then you go to the hospital and you begin to have seizures, and the doctors can't stop you from having your seizures, so they put you into a coma. 9 weeks later you come out of your coma and you're paralyzed from the waist down. And that's what happened to a lady named Stephanie Smith. She's a 22-year-old from Minnesota, and it was from a ground beef patty that she ate. It had traces of E. coli in it, and they didn't even know until it was too late. My claim is that the lack of regulations in meat production lead to negative impacts on society. My first supporting claim is that the lack of safety regulations make it very easy for diseases to spread. Investigative journalist Michael Moss says that there is no federal requirement for grinders to test their ingredients for the pathogen of E. coli. So with that, it just is saying that they don't know where the meat's coming from. It's just all getting thrown in, and that companies don't have to actually check what they're grinding. They can just send it out, and they find out once it's already consumed. And then one of the largest meat packaging companies, Cargill, was violating its own safety procedures in handling ground beef. So they had their own safety procedures that they were breaking, and also they were breaking federal ones. So they're not committing crimes, but they're just putting so many other people at risk other than just their company and their own well-being. An anonymous federal inspector said, as trimmings are going down the processing line into boxes, no one is inspecting every single piece. That goes back to the whole ground beef patty thing, how that since they don't know where the meat's coming from, and even the people can't check every single piece of meat because they're trying to go so fast just to increase production, that it is affecting how the meat is. My second supporting claim is how the lack of safety regulations leave thousands of workers injured. So most of the workers of meat packaging companies are unskilled, and they're really seasonal, so they don't stay for a very long time. And so in order to fix this issue was that the government implemented the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is made to force employers to provide all workers a place of employment free from recognized physical hazards that are likely to cause death or serious harm. And you'd think that this would help out the issues with injured workers, but meat packaging is still one of the most dangerous jobs. Meat packagers have a 21% more likely to develop carpal tunnel. And the meat industry has been identified as a high risk environment for all upper limb disorders. So it's not only carpal tunnel, but it's also not as often, but it's people can get something amputated or cut off just because they got stuck somewhere and they just didn't really know what they were doing. One example of why the meat companies are corrupt are that in Kenny Dobbins from Montfort, he was an employee for 16 years, and his first injury occurred when he fell on the metal teeth of a conveyor belt and pierced his lower back. The company doctors misdiagnosed him, and so then he had a surgery and it was failed, and he was gone for 2 years, and he didn't even file for workers' comp. He went back to work there and was still given the physical task that he kind of had before. The company was trying to make Kenny quit by making him work in unpleasant conditions. So one day he cleaned out one day he had to clean out a gigantic blood tank, and the liquid chlorine cleaning mix was so potent his lungs had been burned and his body was covered in blisters. His injuries occurred because his foreman had only given him a paper mask to wear. So once again, the meat companies are not providing their workers with safe conditions. My last claim is that the production of meat is harmful to the environment as well. The United Nations Foods and Agriculture Organization reported that 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed to livestock, and this is more than the emissions from the entire transportation sector. Researchers at University of Chicago concluded that switching from the standard American diet is more effective in the fight against climate change than switching from a standard American car to a hybrid car. The runoff from meat packaging companies factories have been found to contain manure, intestines, blood, liver, hair, bones, fat, and wastewater, and the lack of regulations, waste sometimes remains stagnant in like the same areas. So like in those cities, they actually tend to take on the smell of the whole meat packaging company. So it's another issue. Okay, in conclusion, the lack of regulations in meat production companies has negative impacts on all of society, including diseases that any human can get, and many injured workers that are mistreated, and harmful effects on the environment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
You're actually not disagreeing. It's just I'm pro with this. And supporting my.
All right, Jenna, the proposition's clearly stated. There's a layout of what the secondary points are. I think that you need to do a little bit more on developing the controversy. I like the example that you have at the start, but relating it to a lack of inspection, it needs to be done a little bit more effectively. Bad things happen. I don't think anybody can deny that bad things happen. The question is, do they happen because there was a lack of regulation? And that's what I think you need to be able to tie your examples into a little bit more. The E. coli, for instance, obviously, apparently there's no test on this. On the other hand, how frequent are E. coli outbreaks? How frequently do people run into this particular problem? This is a very dramatic example of a young woman who had a horrible thing happen to her. And nobody's going to deny that E. coli is a bad thing. However, is it the result of the meatpacking plant's practices? That's the question that's basically what you're saying, that there's a lack of regulation that caused this, or it's the way they process their foods that caused this problem. And I think that that's a little bit of a stretch there. You're going to need some better information on that. The closest you get to it is an anonymous inspector who says, it's not really something that they can do very effectively. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rampant problem. The accidents that take place in the meatpacking plants, you've got one person that had multiple accidents for them, and that's definitely bad. The way that they were treated by the company, it sounds like there was a lawsuit involved in this. Again, it sounds like there were violations of OSHA practices there. So those regulations, it's like my saying, there are bad things on the freeway because people break the rules. Yes, they do break the rules, and bad things happen as a consequence. Where's the argument on that? The argument is that some additional rule might have prevented that, or some additional enforcement might have prevented that. That's what we needed to have here. And it just feels a little bit like it's a random example, and I don't get any statistical support. There was one statistic, I should say that there was it had the highest rate of injuries, or a 22% higher rate of injuries than some other industry. I think you needed to emphasize that information a little bit more, because that's the good link on that particular point. The sources are not always cited. You gave us good examples, but you're not consistent at citing the sources. You want to do that a little bit better. And the greenhouse gas issue really feels like it's a completely separate argument. I think it would probably be better to develop. That could be a claim that somebody else could make. As a subpoint here, it just feels like it's mentioned with a very generic piece of evidence, and not anything that would be sufficient to be convincing to people. I think you need to do a better job if you're going to include it, or it would be better to exclude it. All right. Thank you.